Alright, hey guys, welcome to another tutorial video. Today we're going to break down how to make a torchlight, how to set a stick on fire, how to carry with you, and we're also going to show you how to have it so if you go underwater, the fire goes out and the light goes out and you have to relit the stick you have. So let me go ahead and run a quick demonstration video of it. Well, not a video of it, but I'll do it real time. There is a demonstration video on here on the channel, so if you want to check that out too, that's great. But let me go ahead and do a quick run here. So we go ahead and spawn, we press E, we pick up the stick, and then we see the torch that's already lit. We go to it, and now we have a torch to light. We'll keep going exploring this cave. Now we're running in here, and now we're by water, and if you go under the water, the stick goes out and your light goes out. So now it's darker again. But now if you go back to this new torchlight, you've got a new torch and you have your light again, and then you can go ahead and explore the rest of this area. So it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple, nothing too crazy going on here. So let's open up Kismet, and I'll break down everything here for you. This part here, this is a matinee for the particle splashes. We can ignore that. A couple variables here for booleans. We're going to have, there's a volume around the fire that you light your torch from. There's a volume there. Once you're in that volume and you have the stick, it'll actually light the stick for you and everything like that. And then we have a variable to tell if you picked up the stick or not. And then we also have a variable whether or not that torch stick is lit or not. So the first thing we do here, when the player spawn, we attach a couple things here. First we attach a dynamic movable point light with a fire color, that orange. And then we also attach to the player our interactor, which is going to be our stick, which you can see right here. And here's our light as well. And the last thing we go ahead and attach to the player is the particle, the fire particle. So the fire particle can be found in your content browser. I have a particle here for fire. It's a pretty simple one, nothing too crazy. Not going to go over how to create a fire particle. UDK, I believe, has its own fire particle. If you grab that, it's going to be fine. If not, there's a bunch of tutorials out there as well that cover cascade and particle effects. But that's the first thing we do. As soon as the player spawns, we attach these actors to the player, and a couple of them have relative offsets just to make sure they're all attached properly. We'll go over that. The next thing we do is we set up a volume around this table with the torch stick on it right here. So there's actually two sticks. There's the one you'll actually carry. That one's going to be invisible until you pick up the stick. And this stick's just here for display so you can see it. So what we do with this volume here, so if we touch that volume, we're going to compare a boolean. And it basically says, hey, does the player already have the stick? If they don't, it's going to play an announcement which is press E to pick up the torch stick. And then it's going to put one of our variables here, the B is touching stick volume. That's going to set it to true, just so we know when we're in that volume. And then when we untouch that volume, it's going to set that variable, the B is touching stick volume, to false again. The next thing we do is when we are touching that trigger volume, we want to have a key button pressed event. We're going to press E. And then when we press E, we're comparing a couple things here. So the first thing is if the player is touching that stick volume area. If they're not, we don't want anything to happen. But if they are, the next thing we want to do is compare whether or not the player already has the torch stick. If they don't, what we're going to do, we're going to destroy this stick right here. We're going to unhide the stick over here, just so you can see it. And then we're going to set the variable B has torch stick to true, now that the player has the torch stick. So the next thing we're going to do, it's kind of a repetitive thing, just depending on what you need to do. But we have these trigger volumes. Let me go to it here. We have a trigger volume here that's near the fire, a torch light in the level. Basically what we're going to do, every time the player touches this volume, we're going to see if he has the stick or not, if he picked up the stick. If he does, what we're going to do is then turn on the point light and the particle effect. So it's going to turn on the light for the fire that you have, as well as ignite the fire for you. And that the way that they're attached to the player, they're actually going to show up in real time in the correct places there. We'll go over that as well. And then we're going to set the boolean for the torch. Is the torch lit? Is there fire and everything? We're going to set that to true. And then the next thing we do is the interactor here. When I say the interactor, I mean the stick that we're carrying, the one that starts in the beginning. If that touches, we have a touch event, and if it touches these specific trigger volume, and if we let me go ahead and unshrink the Kismet window. Let's go to unlit. Here's the water section, and then if we go into wireframe mode, we're going to find a trigger volume. This is the trigger volume. So basically, in the Kismet, we're waiting for our stick object to touch a trigger volume, and we're going to put that trigger volume, whichever it touches, into this empty variable, and then we're going to compare that variable to the trigger that we want it to be looking at. So trigger 4 is this trigger volume we're looking at. So basically, this statement here is saying if the stick is touching this trigger volume and the torch is lit, this is what this comparable is. We're going to turn off the light and the emitter, and we're going to set the boolean, the is torch lit, to false. And then what we do here, since there's multiple instances where the particle can go off and on, we have another set where you can turn on the firelight for the second trigger volume. And it has the same logic as the first one, where we compare whether or not the player has the stick, and if they do, we go ahead and turn that back on and give them the fire particle, and we set that back to true. And then we do the same thing for the second water, which I didn't really demonstrate, but there is a second volume in here. We go right here. We do the same thing we did for the first trigger volume, where if the stick actor touches it, it will turn off the light, and it will turn off the particle itself. So what we're going to do, we're going to delete everything that has to do with our Kismet sequence. So these are fine, but we're going to go ahead and delete all of these. And we're going to start from scratch. The first thing I'm going to break down here, the first thing we create is a point light. This is a dynamic light. So kind of break that down for you. If you hold down the L key and left click in your scene, it'll create a light for you. Right click on that, convert light, go to point lights, and then point light movable. It'll create the same exact point light that I'm using, the dynamic point light. But then in its properties, I changed the radius and I changed the brightness and the color, just to give it the color of fire, essentially. But in here, there's also a check. It says enabled. We're going to uncheck that because we don't want the light to turn on until there's actually a torch lit. And since it's a dynamic light, we can turn it on and off in Kismet, and we can attach it to the player in Kismet. The next thing we do, I put a stick here, and I rotate it in such a way so that when we attach it to the player, we don't have to do any relative rotation offsets. We can just do position, because this is how we want the torch to look. So if this is our camera, you basically want it to kind of look like that, where you're like kind of holding it. And then the last thing I do, we put the fire particle that we find, we put it right at the tip towards the stick here, just so it looks like the end of the stick is set on fire. So the first thing we're going to do, let's go into Kismet. Now that we have all these these are the three most important actors that we're going to need for the sequence. Now that we have them all in our scene and all together there, what we're going to do, we're going to go in Kismet. And the first thing we're going to do first is create the variables we need. So there's going to be all booleans. So holding down the B key and left clicking should create us a bool variable. We're going to name the first one. The B is touching stick volume. That's how I named it. You can honestly name it anything you want. And all these variables are going to start out false. They're only going to become true once we want them to be true. So let's copy and paste this one. And then we're going to name the second one B has torch light, or torch stick. This is to check whether or not we have the torch stick in our hands. And the last thing here, copy and paste. And then the last one's going to be called B is torch lit. These are all the variables we're going to need. So let's go ahead and select all of them using Control Alt and left click drag. Hit C to comment. We're just going to call these variables. Then we have them in their own little nice little cozy little thing here. So let's get on with actually attaching some of these actors to the player. So the first thing we're going to do, our initial event is whenever the players spawn. So let's right click, new event, player spawned. And what we're going to do with the player spawned, we're going to leave everything alone with the player spawn thing. There's no way for you to die in this level, so don't have to worry about anything. But if you do have enemies or any way for the player to die in your instance of your level, I would set the max trigger count to 0, just so every time they spawn back, they have the TorchLight, or however you want your torch sequence to really function. It's up to you at that point. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to attach the dynamic point light. So let's right-click, New Action, Actor, and we're going to go to Attach to Actor. Okay, so the target is going to be our player. So holding in the P key, let's left-click on Target, and then uncheck all players. That'll make it player 0, which is us. And then for the attachment, let's select the point light in the level. Going back into Kismet, let's right-click on the attachment and then use New Object Var using point light movable. So we got that set up. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to copy and paste this sequence. And the reason why we're copying and pasting this sequence is sometimes when you attach multiple objects using one attached to actor node, it does cause problems. So just for each instance of the actor, we're going to create a new node for it. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to delete the point light for the second instance of attached to actor. And we're going to attach the actual interactor for the stick. Now this is just a random mesh that I have in my packages here on my version of UDK. You can find any kind of stick-like object. They used to have a torch mesh. I don't know where that is anymore, if they took that away, but I'm sure you'll find something. And we're also going to make sure that this interactor is, an interactor. We got to make sure it's dynamic, because if we don't, it's not going to attach to us. It's going to give us a lot of problems in the long run. So if you don't know how to make an interactor, you just bring in the static mesh, you right-click on it, go down to Convert, and then instead of it saying Convert Mover to Static Mesh Actor, it'll say Convert Static Mesh Actor to Mover, and then from there you're all set. So with that selected in our scene, let's right-click on the attachment and then do New Object Var using Interactor 1. And then the last thing, we're going to copy and paste this one more time. The last thing we need to attach is the particle effect. So with the particle, obviously when the level starts, we want it to not turn on. So there is a check here. It says auto activate. We're going to uncheck that, and that means it's not going to activate right at the beginning of the level. It's going to activate when we tell it to. So with that particle effect selected, right-click on the third attachment, and then do a new object var using emitter 4. So we got that set up. Everything is looking good with that, but there is a couple things actually that we need to change. When we attach things to actors, or when we attach any actor to any other actor, its position is going to be different. It's going to give us a little bit of a problem. So for the point light, our relative position where it's located right now is fine for us. We don't need to do anything like that. We don't need to give it a custom relative offset for its position, so we're going to leave that one alone. But we may need to adjust it later. So like the first thing we're going to do actually is the interactor. So with that selected, there's going to be the relative offsets at the bottom. So first thing we're going to do is check the use relative offset just to make sure it uses it. And these are the numbers I use, and they're stuff I had to play with. These aren't just generic numbers. For the X, it's going to be 96 unreal units. For the Y, it's going to be 32 units. And for the Z, it's going to be 48 units. Just play around with that, see how it looks. You'll have to adjust these values, but it's totally worth it. Mine were just simple numbers I just messed with. With that, we're actually going to change the light's relative position as well. So we're going to check that. And we're going to change this to 128 in the X. In the Y, it's going to be 92. And in the Z, it's going to be 64. The last thing here is going to be for our particle effect. So for the particle, it's going to be the same numbers here. It's going to be 96, 32, and then 48. I believe these are the same exact numbers we used for the stick, so there is a reason for that. But don't forget to make sure you check use relative offset, or it's not going to work properly. So we got that all set up. Let's just see if that works. So let's go and play in the editor. There's not really any way to tell if it works. So what we're going to have to do, something I also forgot to mention, in the interactor properties, if you type in hidden, you're going to find a display section. It says hidden. You're going to check that because it's going to be invisible when you start. But if we uncheck that right now, and we hit play, you see our stick. And it's in the position we want. So we know that's working. So let's check hidden again, just to make sure it's hidden when we play. So if we play again, we can't see the stick or anything. So that's good. And we got that all working, so that's perfect. So let's select this section and then press C on the keyboard. We're going to call this player initialization attachments. So that's working, and that's awesome. So let's go ahead and organize this just a tad bit. The next thing we're going to do is going to be for the actual picking up of the stick that we find right here. This stick is the same mesh as we have over here, and this one is also an interactor because in Kismet you can't destroy objects that aren't dynamic. So if you had a static mesh there and you try to use the destroy node, which basically eliminates the attachment or whichever reference you're using, it completely eliminates that from the level, and they need to be dynamic in order for that to work. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to need our trigger volume here selected. If you don't know how to create a trigger volume, you just take your builder brush. So here's my builder brush over here. And then with that selected, whichever, you morph the size to whatever you want the volume to actually encompass. Go to volumes, and then all the way at the bottom there's one that says trigger volume. That's what you'll use. And trigger volumes by themselves aren't dynamic. They do have dynamic trigger volumes. Those can move and those can be animated, things like that. But this trigger volume, all the trigger volumes in here could be stationary, so we don't even need to worry about that. So let's go ahead and select this trigger volume, the one that engulfs our stick position. The one that we're going to pick up. Let's go back into Kismet and making sure that trigger volume is selected. Let's right click, do a new event using trigger volume 0. And then the only thing we're really going to change in here is the max trigger count. So we're going to change that from 1 to 0 just so you can touch this multiple times. And the first thing we're going to do whenever you touch this trigger volume, we're going to compare whether or not the player already has the stick or not. If the player already has the stick, we don't want this volume to basically say, hey, press E to pick up the stick, because you already have it, so that doesn't make sense. So we're going to need a comparison node. We're going to do new condition, comparison, compare bool, link those guys up together. And then the next thing, what bool are we going to be checking for? It's the B has torch stick. So let's create a new name variable to reference that boolean. So let's go to new variable, name variable, and then down here, let's change it to bool and give it the name B has torch stick. And you'll get a check mark once you know it's correct and matching appropriately. So basically what we want to have happen here, if the player does not have the torch stick, which means it's false, that's when we want to have an announcement played where it tells you to press E to pick up the stick. So let's go to new action, voice announcements, play announcement. And the announcement text, let's just do press E to pick up stick. And we're going to plug that into the false. And the next thing we're going to do is once the player, well, there's two things we're going to have to do here. The first thing is when the player does touch the volume, we're going to have to set the B is touching stick volume to true. Let's go to new action, set variable, boolean. Plug that in. The value of it's going to be true because we are touching the volume here. So let's right click on value, add a new boolean, change the 0 to a 1 to make it true. And then the target is going to be another name variable, so I'm just going to copy and paste. But it's going to be the B is touching stick volume. Just make sure you spell everything correctly so it matches. And that's all we really need. The last thing we actually need at all for this section is when we untouch the volume here. So whenever we untouch this volume, we basically want to set the B is touching stick volume from true to false. So let's change the 1 back to a 0 here. And so basically what happens in the sequence, whenever we touch that volume that surrounds our stick, if we don't have the torch stick already, it's going to tell us, hey, press E to pick up the stick. And then we set the B is touching stick volume to true. Once we untouch it, we set that B is touching stick volume back to false. So now that we have that set up, we can set up our input event. So let's go right click, new event, input, key button pressed. Couple things we're going to need to change here. I think it's just one. It's just going to be what input name we're going to add. So under input names, let's hit that green check. And then let's do a capital E for echo. And that basically says, hey, whenever we press E, we're going to fire an event. So we need a couple of the conditions to be true before we even allow the player to pick up the stick. We're going to have to make sure we are touching that stick volume, and we're going to make sure that the player doesn't already have the stick. So we're going to need a couple of comparisons. So let's do new condition, comparison, compare bool. So plug that right in. And then the first bool we're going to compare is the B is touching stick volume. So let's copy and paste that. Plug it into bool. And if this is true, that's when we want to compare the second variable. So let's copy and paste the compare bool. Second bool is going to be the B has torch stick. So let's copy and paste that one because we did make that. And then if the player does not have the torch stick, meaning this is false, that's when we're going to do a couple things. Let's go to New Action, Actor, Destroy. This is the Destroy node I mentioned. This destroys any actor or target that you set it to. It has to be a dynamic object. The target is going to be this stick here, our mock stick, the one that the player thinks is there. We're going to destroy that. And then we're going to unhide the interactor, the one that we have attached to us. So let's go to New Action. And then let's go under Toggle. And then Toggle Hidden. So on the out, we're going to do Unhide. And then for the target, it's going to be the stick that we had attached to our player. So let's right-click, having that selected, do New Object for using interactor_1, which is the name of my interactor. It could be different for you. And the very last thing, we're going to set a Boolean here. New Action, set variable, bool. And the bool we're going to set is the B has torch stick. So let's copy and paste that. That's going to be our target. And then the value, right-click on that, create a new bool variable. And we're going to change that to from 0 to 1 to make it true, because now we have the interactor, we have our torch stick. So that should have us be able to walk up to the torch stick, press E, and then it will allow us to actually get the stick. So let's go ahead and see if that's working. So we're walking up. It says press E to pick up torch stick. Press E, and now we have it. So that's pretty cool. And then if we touch the volume again, it doesn't tell us to press E again because we already have the stick. So we know that's working. So that's awesome. Let's go back into Kismet. Let's select everything we just used. And we're going to create a comment, and we'll just call it pick up torch stick. Okay, so let's just organize this a tad bit. Whoops, forgot one. Okay, so our next step is to turn on the particle and the light once the player is near the torch and has the torch stick. So this is a fairly simple thing to do here. So what we're going to do, let's go into our scene real quick. Here's the first instance of the TorchLight that you can set fire to. We have a trigger volume around it. It's almost as identical as the other trigger volume we have around the torch stick. So we're going to basically have it so when the player touches this trigger volume, we check if they have the torch stick, and if they do, we're going to turn on the light for the attached light, and we're going to turn on the attached particle, and we're going to set our variable, the B is torch lit, to true. So that's very simple. So having this trigger volume selected, let's go into Kismet, right-click, new event using trigger volume 2, touch. And there's no special kind of touch here, it's just to be for the pawn. The only thing we're really going to change is the max trigger count. We're going to change that from 1 to 0, just so it can fire multiple times. And now the first thing we're going to need to do, we're going to see if the player has the stick or not. So let's go to New Condition, Comparison, Compare Bool, plug that in. And we're going to need the B has torch stick, plug that in. And if they do have the torch stick, that's when we're going to actually toggle on the light and the particle effect. So let's go to New Action, Toggle, and then Toggle. And so if this is true, we want to go ahead and turn on our targets. And our targets for this instance are going to be our point light. So let's select that, right click, and then add that object variable. And then it's going to be your particle. So select that, right click on the target, and add that as well. So we have both of these turning on. Last thing we need to do is set the variable. So New Action, set variable, bool. And we're going to create a new named variable. So let's just copy and paste one of the ones we have already. Change the name to B is torch lit. Put that into the target. And then the value is going to be true instead of false. So change that to a 1. So now if we have our torch stick and we touch that volume, it's going to turn on the particle effect and the light. So let's give that a try. So let's first walk up to it, make sure nothing happens. So we walk up to it, and nothing happens, it's normal. But then, let's get our stick. And now we have a lit torch. And because it's attached to the player, the torch and the light are following you. And there's no problems with that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to select these guys. Name them light torch 01. We're going to name the 01 because there is an identical section here. So we're going to go. I'll show you what I'm talking about because in this other section of the level, once I find it, here it is. It's an identical torch with the fire particle and the another trigger volume. So what we're going to do, because we want to, if the player does accidentally unlight the torch by touching the water, that we're going to go over in just a moment, we want the player to be able to relight that fire. So in Kismet, let's copy and paste this. We're going to rename the comment to light torch 02. And all we need to do is take the trigger volume, the second instance of it, have that selected, and then right click on the second instance of the trigger volume touch event, and just tell it to assign the trigger volume, so assign trigger 1 to this event. So this is telling us, hey, you can actually light the torch here as well. So I'll show you that. So we'll pick up the stick, and we're going to skip this one. And instead, we're going to go through the level. It's going to be a little hard to see, but it's whatever. So now we're in water. Now we're almost on the other end here. And now if we walk up to this guy, boom, we have torch again. So it's a really easy way to really just make multiple instances and everything like that. It's a lot of fun. So all we need to do now is set it up so if the player does touch the trigger volumes associated with the water, we're going to turn off the particle effect and turn off the light. So this is relatively easy as well. What we're going to do a touch event using the interactor for the stick that we have attached to the player. So in our scene, let's select that stick. And then in Kismet, let's right click, new event using interactors _1. Obviously, it's going to be a touch event. And there's a couple of special things we're going to need to do for this touch event. So instead of it being pawn as the class proximity type, let's hit the drop down list, hit T and then R, and that'll get you down to trigger. And we're just going to scroll down a little bit more and get trigger volume. And then we're going to uncheck force overlapping. That means we don't want the player to be overlapping at the time of activation. Max trigger count, we're going to set that to 0 so it can happen multiple times. And then last but not least, we're going to set the player only. We're going to uncheck that just so it's not the player only. So we got that all set up, and what we're going to need to do now for the Instigator, let's right click on that and just create a new empty object variable. This means whatever the interactor does touch, it's going to get put into this object variable. Now we want to test to see whatever the interactor touches, we want to see if it's the trigger volumes that we want it to be. So back here by the first water pool, here's our trigger volume for it. And we want to have that selected. Because we want to see if the interactor is touching this volume or not. So back into Kismet, we're going to need a new comparison. So compare, new condition, comparison, compare objects. So this is going to allow us to compare objects with one another. So basically we're going to check the object that's put into this empty variable. We're going to check it to see if it's trigger volume 4, which is the name of mine. If it is, then we're going to compare another bool. So new condition, comparison, compare bool. So if those are equal, and the B is torch lit set to true, so we're going to copy and paste that, put that in. So if that's true, we're going to get another toggle. So let's do new action, toggle, toggle, and then put true into turn off. And then for the turn off, the targets, if you haven't thought of it, it's going to be our light and it's going to be our torch particle effect. So let's go ahead. And then in the scene, let's get the light, right click, put that into one of the targets, and then get the particle effect, right click, put that as in the other target. So that's relatively simple here. And the last thing we're going to do is set the B is torch lit variable. We're going to set that to false because now it's not lit. So let's go to new action, set variable, bool, hook that up to each other. The value, right click on that. Create new bool variable. We're going to leave it at 0 for false, and then let's just copy and paste the B is torch lit and set that to the target. So that's fairly simple. So let's just test to make sure that's working. So let's go ahead and play. Let's get our stick. Alright, now that it's lit, let's go ahead and touch The water and the trigger volume is a little bit submerged under the water, so it does require the player to go underwater. But now we know it, and it's working. We got the torch turned off, and we can't really see the light turned off as well. So we know that's working, which is great. So last thing we're going to do, because there is another section with water in it, let's select the second trigger volume that you create around the pool of water here. Go back into Kismet. Let's go ahead and select these. Press C to comment. We're going to do turn off torch in water underscore 01. Now that we have that, let's move that into place. Copy paste that. Rename the comment for 02. And the only thing we're going to update is the compare objects with that trigger volume, the second one in our scene selected. Let's right click on this variable, update it, and assign it to the new trigger volume. So let's see if that's working. So let's get a torch stick. I'm not going to light it here, I'm going to light it on the other section. Let's go ahead and jump into the water. Let's go ahead and light it here. And then let's submerge ourselves in this water over here. And then we know it turned off there. So we got everything working. So that's basically how you create a TorchLight. It's all it really takes is a couple booleans, a dynamic light, a particle effect, and an interactor for your stick. So all we did, just to break it down one last time, we went ahead. As soon as the player spawns, we attached the point light, we attached the stick interactor, and we attached the particle effect. We made sure that the dynamic light was not enabled. That's when we turn it on. We made sure the interactor was hidden, and we made sure that the emitter was set to not auto-activate. The next thing we did, we set up a trigger volume around the actual stick that you see, and when you're touching that, it allows us to play a text announcement to tell you to press E to pick up the stick. And then if you are touching that volume and you press E and you don't have the stick, we destroy the interactor that's on the table and then unhide the one that's attached to you so it looks like you picked up the stick. And then what we did, to light the torch, we made sure you had the stick. And if you touch the trigger volume surrounding the torches, either whichever one you have, if you do have the stick and you touch them, we turn on that light and we turn on that particle. And then we have it for the other trigger volumes. We have it that interactor stick that's attached to you. We have to do a couple of touch events. We have it compare to make sure it's touching the appropriate trigger volumes. And if it is touching those volumes and it's currently turned on, we go ahead and turn off the light and turn off the emitter and make sure that we put those booleans set to the right variables, to the right value, I should say. And we do that in multiple instances. So it's very simple, not too difficult. So I hope you guys learned a little bit. This was a fun one to do. Had a lot of fun creating the environment too. There was a lot of fun stuff going on there. So I hope you guys, like I said, learned a lot. If you liked the video, go ahead and hit like, comment with more suggestions, any questions you guys have. Make sure if you haven't already, just subscribe, share to your friends. I want to get as many people learning UDK as possible, just so we can all learn how to make these kind of things have more fun and kind of make the projects we're working on a little bit easier. So yeah, so I hope you guys learned a lot. So this is going to be the end of this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed. So I'll see you next time. Bye. I gotta turn off the video. Bye.